welcome to tonight's event with Jill McCorkle. I'm Julia Ridley Smith. I'll be talking with Jill and about her new book and asking her a few questions. She's going to give us a couple of readings, and towards the end of our time together, we will open up the chat where you can ask Jill questions. I ask you just to direct those questions to me, Julia Smith, in the chat, and then I will relay those to Jill. So I'm really excited to be here tonight to talk to Jill. I've known Jill now for a pretty long time. I hate to even say how long. She was my teacher at UNC Chapel Hill a long time ago, and also at the Sewanee Writers Conference, a summer writing conference out in Tennessee. You probably all know Jill without introduction, but I'm going to introduce her anyway. She has published 6 novels and 4 collections of short stories before this new novel, Hieroglyphics. This is her 7th, I believe. Her work has appeared in Best American Short Stories several times, as well as the Norton Anthology of Short Fiction. 5 of her books have been New York Times notable books. And her novel Life After Life, which was her novel that came out before this one, was a New York Times bestseller. She's received countless awards for her fiction. She's written for the New York Times Book Review, the Washington Post, Boston Globe, Garden and Gun, The Atlantic, and lots of other publications. She was a Briggs Copeland Lecturer in Fiction at Harvard, where she also chaired the Department of Creative Writing. And she's currently a faculty member of the Bennington College Writing Seminars and is affiliated with the MFA program at North Carolina State University. So, welcome, Jill.
Thank you, Julia. It was not so long ago at all, was it?
It doesn't feel that long ago.
And that handsome son of yours just happened to appear one day.
Did he? Did he pop in?
No, I'm saying in the world. Yeah.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. So I'm so excited to be talking to you about this book, which I just loved. I just finished it earlier this week. So I'm excited to hear you read a little bit from it, and then we can get into talking about some of the characters and themes.
Great, thank you. And thanks to everyone for coming out, tuning in. What do we say now? I'll tell you a little bit about the novel before I read. There are 4 primary characters, and there's an elderly couple, Lil and Frank, who after living many, many years in New England have retired to Southern Pines. And Lil's sections in the novel are basically journal or letter. She's addressing her children. She's basically editing her life. She's going through a lot of things and deciding what she may or may not want them to know. And meanwhile, her husband, who spent time in this part of North Carolina as a boy, is going back, trying to get into the house he lived in as a kid. His parents were on a train in 1943, where a lot of World War II soldiers were coming home at Christmas. A big North Carolina train wreck in Renner, North Carolina, and it made all the front page news, and 74 people killed and many, many injured, and sort of confined to the area until they were able to leave and go home. And his father died in the crash, and his mother just then could not leave the place where he had died. So Frank had to leave his boyhood home and come to live in North Carolina. And so lately he has sort of been haunting this house, trying to get in to see it. And now it's being rented by this young single mother who works as a court stenographer, Shelley. And she is in a very difficult place in life. And her son, Harvey, is really acting out a lot at school and just has a lot going on. So those are the four main characters, and really what brings them together is that Shelley and Harvey are now basically occupying the same space on Earth that Frank once occupied as a boy. So I'll just read a little bit of Lil to give you a taste of her. Oh, I've got my glasses on.
Ready.
August 10th, 2016, Southern Pines, North Carolina. You two have always wondered why I spend so much time filling these notebooks. Frank, you too, if you're reading this. But it's simply a part of my life, a way to clear my mind and to remember. Sometimes I just record the weather, something simple about the day. It's so easy to let everything run together. I had years that were that way, and I find such loss troubling. Better to try to define something, the premature blue dusk of a winter afternoon, or the long clear light of summer, that kind of light that makes you feel immortal. And I guess that's why we hold on to our bits and pieces in the first place, because we aren't immortal. And though denial fills our days and years, especially those that have slipped away, that kernel of truth is always lodged within. We all are haunted by something we did or did not do, and the passing years either add to the weight or diminish it. Mine have diminished, perhaps because I've spent time thinking about it all. It might sound silly, but I see these bits and pieces as my contribution to evolution, the unearthing and dusting of the prints and markers that led me here. Some seem to bulldoze right through life and up to their headstones, but I want to take my time. I want to find the right words. I imagine my recipient to be you two, or perhaps your children, and I hope this is so, rather than some stranger who comes in and hoists old boxes into a dumpster or rakes away the remainders of my life like the sad debris in the aftermath of a flood or fire. I'll never get over the sight of what we left behind at our home of over 50 years to move down here. A mountain of cast-off things, old towels and linens, papers and books and shoes and pots, side tables and lamps, hoses and hose, packets of seeds I meant to plant, and a rubber squeak toy that had been safely hidden away in the back of my closet by one of the dogs long dead. And so much more. Things not needed, things long forgotten, cans of cream of whatever soup, and V8 juice, why? And peas that had sat there forgotten for years, and things that never should have been there in the first place, like tuna helper, or those things in my closet, like that geometric print mini dress I bought in the 60s, hoping to look like Petula Clark or Judy Carn, a perky pixie kind of dress that I never had the nerve to wear, and instead looked at it there at the back of the closet for years, along with a wiglet and a long frosted fall and some jackets with shoulders resembling a football player or Victorian monarch. We divided it all into goodwill, consignment, recycle, or landfill. But there were also the things I couldn't let go of, letters, reminders, souvenirs, and I'm taking my time, relieved when I find something that might have gotten lost in that mountain of debris, like one of your drawings from first grade, or the stub from a movie I'd forgotten I even saw, or a note from my father. When the moving van pulled away that afternoon and we got in the car and turned southward, the space within the car seemed so empty, vacant. Our suitcases and silver chest in the trunk, an overnight bag and thermos of coffee on the back seat. And I had that terrible feeling that I had forgotten something, because I was thinking of all the times the car was filled with you two, your belongings, your music and voices, the dogs, while going to school or on vacation or just to the grocery store, where I bought all of those things that I then put on the shelf there in our dimly lit pantry on the red gingham contact paper I spent one snowy afternoon 40 years ago cutting and sticking in place. All those things that I placed there and then forgot about. It's mysterious how fluid time has become for me. I wake and pour a glass and have no idea what I'll find. In short, I'm homesick and I'm time sick. I would be lying not to say that. It's possible to feel content and resolved and still be homesick. I miss all that no longer is, which is why I paste and piece all these scraps together. Sometimes I hold a ticket or photo, a piece of paper, while willing myself back to where I first held it. I know that might sound silly, but it's what I do. I want to hear your young voices, the dog scratching to come in. I want to call my father on the telephone, finger in that rotary dial, one number at a time, TW3 3642. Let me take this playbill and arrive at the theater, or this receipt and find myself there in the produce aisle of Star Market. Then after the show, after I check out, after I sit and let the car warm up, I drive those familiar streets home and find everything just as I left it, the kitchen door creaking behind me.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm so glad you chose that passage or those passages to read, because when I first started this book and I came across that passage, it really spoke to me because I've been through that process with my parents' house, cleaning it out, going through all the detritus of many years. They never threw out anything. And I was wondering about that as I was reading that passage about, one, whether that's something that you have experienced already in your life. And also just, I wanted to talk more about even that idea of how objects are these kind of keys to our past, and that they sort of unlock doors and also almost enable us to travel through time, you know, the way that she does in this passage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they are like little keys to all these memories. And, you know, I have experienced it already because I wasn't in the same house for 50 years, you know, as they were. But leaving the house my children grew up in Massachusetts, when I moved back here, felt a little like that, you know, and that mountain in the yard. And it was before we knew how to, you know, decide what sparks joy, right?
Oh, right.
You know, I mean, I feel like I left like just a mountain behind me, and then have, you know, have moved yet again since. And I think with each move, there's kind of a shedding process. And I learned when my children were really young that if you didn't go through that artwork immediately and pick two, like if you let the whole stash stay until like 2 years, then it's impossible to part with it because it represents a time that's already gone.
Oh yeah, it's endless. I still have boxes of my son's. We went through a box a few weeks ago. But he loved looking back at it, you know, and it's funny to see. I mean, he's still young, but he already has that nostalgia.
Oh yeah.
And you could see his memory sparking, you know, as he was going through those things too. And that,
well, I was thinking about how so much of what really is important in our life can be mapped and traced by these little seemingly insignificant objects or tokens that are around us. And, you know, a stranger might come in and they would have no idea what it meant. And there's often a whole story behind, you know, this one little rock or something that you have on a shelf. And so to me, I began to think of those objects as a kind of hieroglyphic, you know, a kind of language that others may or may not be able to decipher if we weren't there to tell our own stories. And so I was just in the backdrop, you know, I have these two disasters. I have the train wreck, and then Lil's mother, when Lil was only 10, her mother, who taught dance, basically goes out one night, you know, with the "I'll be back," and did not say where she was going, or kind of misled them. And she actually went to the Coconut Grove nightclub. And of course, that's a famous fire, devastating, you know, 490 some lives lost. And it, you know, it was just this catastrophic event that completely changed all the fire codes, the way that burn victims are worked with. And of course, many lives just stopped mid-stride, just as the train wreck. And I was taken by both of these catastrophes because they, you know, they really united the community in terms of everyone turning out. But it also, they became before and after markers. You know, when my dad was a teenager when the train wreck happened in Robeson County. And so he had actually gone and seen the aftermath. And it was December, so there were Christmas presents scattered everywhere, a bridal veil up in a tree. And then the same, you know, with the Coconut Grove fire, the whole time I was living in Boston, people would often say, well, so-and-so's grandmother was at the Coconut Grove that night, or even 2 days ago, and I heard from several people, there was an obituary in the Globe where this gentleman, Marshall Cole, had escaped, a young tap dancer, and had escaped, and he just died at age 94. And I think now there are only 4 survivors. But anyway, what intrigued me in reading about both of these events is pre-cell phone, you know, all people knew is that there had been an accident and no way of contacting their loved ones. And so in the aftermath, people were identified by things we take for granted or would never think of, you know. So suddenly the dry cleaning tag becomes this intimate object, you know, or some piece of jewelry. Or so I was just really taken by those little things, you know. You get up and you button your shirt,
Right.
and where that button might land at some point, you know. So it's intriguing to me, a different kind of archaeology maybe.
And of course, that leads into Frank's job.
Yeah.
So Frank is Lil's husband, and he's a retired professor of archaeology. Yes. So of course, it's his job to read signs of a different kind. But I think what's so interesting in this book is that although Frank and Lil are brought together by these tragedies that happened when they were children, you know, and it's sort of implied that on their first date, they're not really that interested in each other until they learn that they each have this tragic event in their past, having lost a parent in this sort of mass tragedy as a young child. And obviously they've probably never met anybody else who's had this experience before, and that brings them together.
Exactly.
But what you get that I love in this novel is this retrospect of how all their lives after they've met, they've dealt with the aftermath of that tragedy for themselves in very different ways. Mm-hmm. And Frank has he's a professor of archaeology. He wants to dig down and get details, and he understands certain kinds of signs and certain kinds of history. And then Lil becomes a dance teacher like her mother. And so she has this much more expressive way of kind of dealing with her grief. could you talk a little bit about that, sort of how you arrived at these two characters and how do they stay together all these years, you know?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of work went into it, as you know, from the novel, because they certainly hit rough patches through there. I think Lil is one of those people just determined to have as much resolution as she can in her life. I think her whole life is marked by the unknown, you know, so to have had her mother leave and just basically say good night and then never return, leaves her spending much of her life trying to figure out what took her there, who she was with, just the mystery of the unknown. But if it is possible to find an answer, you know, she's the one who's going to get a flashlight and go in the darkest closet to see whatever skeletons are in there and try to put it to rest. And Frank is just, he's the opposite there. You know, he has got it compartmentalized. He has come to a place in life where I think he even capped a lot of his good memories because they were just too painful. And, you know, he as he gets older, he realizes that's also in many ways what his mother did by choosing to stay in this place. She just could not face where her life had once felt perfect.
Yeah.
Going back.
Doesn't want to go back there, right?
So, and then Shelley, Shelley is a character who has a lot of darkness in her past and a lot, so that's kind of a mystery along the way in the novel, because you know she's running from something, but you're not sure what. And she is really somebody who has slammed and locked every door back, you know.
Right. And when you get the sense with Shelley that she's almost, you know, in another generation, right? We don't know what's happened to her, but you kind of get this specter of what could have happened to Frank's mother had she not remarried. You know, and now Shelley's living, of course, in the house where Frank lived after the train accident.
Right.
And she's, you know, I'm not giving anything away because Frank comes in the very first scene of the novel. He wants to get in and see the house where he last lived with his mother and his stepfather. And she naturally is suspicious of him. Who is this old man showing up at my door? She's not going to let him in. So that's kind of one of the questions of suspense through the whole novel is Shelley ever going to let him in? And what that highlights is just that she is in this position where, as you say, we don't really know what's happened to her, but it hasn't been good. She's got two sons, Jason, who's a little older and at college age, I guess, and Harvey, who's younger, and as you say, has a lot going on. He's always telling these terrible stories to kids at his camp, which I just loved.
Yeah, he's obsessed with, you know, serial killers and all kinds of like really dark things.
Yeah, there's a lot of dark things running through this novel. And that kind of lends to Shelley. We don't know what happened to Shelley, but because there's so many dark things in the novel, we kind of assume that it's something fairly dark for her.
Yes, and you do learn. Yeah.
You learn some. I don't want to give away anything, but
yes, thank you.
She's a stenographer, and she's working in the courthouse on a murder case, right? Which again, I don't want to give away too much because it's a story that's related to your previous novel, Life After Life. Yeah. There are characters and a storyline that kind of carry over from there. And there's some resonance between Shelley and the murder victim, right? There's some,
definitely. And you know how that after life, you know, I had this murder happens in that novel, and it was something I knew. That was one thing I knew the whole time I was writing that novel. It's like I didn't want it to happen, but I sort of always knew That's
It was
where
very shocking.
where it was headed.
Mm-hmm.
And in the name of reality, I did not solve it because that character is, you know, was a young woman very much on the fringe of society, just sort of getting herself together. The kind of young woman who is invisible to many, and things do happen and people do disappear and it's not solved. And that was the frame of mind I was in, but I heard from so many readers.
Oh, I bet you did.
They were saying, you can't let this, you justice. And so I thought, okay, so what'll I do? So Shelley is in the courtroom, and I had to have something going on. And so that is the trial in the background.
Right.
And it's a trial pre-Harvey Weinstein, too. I mean, it was all written before the Me Too movement.
Right. Well, I wonder if you would read that passage from Shelley's point of view, and then we could talk about her a little bit more.
Sure. Let's see. I'll just read a little. Okay. There are so many things Shelley wishes she could say. Things that fight to get on the tongue only to be swallowed back down in the name of composure or decency or respect. As a child, it's why she loved that book, Go Dog Go, and why she has enjoyed reading it to her boys. Do you like my hat? The dogs at the dog party ask, and one repeatedly says, I do not. Instead of that polite girl thing so many of us were raised to do. Well, it's a hat like I've never seen before, and what a hat that is. Oh my, that's a hat, all right. And aren't you sweet to even think to ask my opinion? I'm so flattered and honored that you thought of me. Nice girls equal enablers. Now there are whole libraries of books about this. Do you like my hat? Hell no, it looks like shit. Doesn't she look just like a little doll? Oh God, yes, a little voodoo doll with rusty pins stuck all about the mouth. These cases get to her this way, and she has to vent somewhere so she won't screw up and accidentally shout out in the courtroom. She likes to take shorthand the old-fashioned way with a piece of paper and a pencil, a method that requires her alert attention and doesn't leave room for mistakes or for other thoughts to enter her mind, a problem she has had her whole life, sometimes several thoughts coming to her at one time, so that she consciously has to slow down, and she tells herself, slow down, only she can't afford to do that while at work, because just that little soothing repetition could cost her a very important sentence or admission or piece of evidence. Her job is very stressful this way.
It is stressful. But I was so interested by that passage, you know, and I had flagged that line, nice girls equal enablers. Because, you know, like you, I grew up in North Carolina and was taught to be a nice girl who always would be polite, say the nice thing. And I was laughing when you were describing that, oh, what a hat that is. My mother had one, you know, she was an antique dealer. And so when she had to deliver furniture to somebody's house and they wanted to show her something that she wasn't particularly impressed with, well, that she thought was hideous, she would say, oh my, that is breathtaking. So, you know, same idea.
I remember, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one. I just outed her, but yeah, it's okay. But I was thinking about that because, you know, Shelley is trying to now, she's trying to have this sort of more professional job maybe than she expected to have. And there's a point in the novel in which that becomes precarious because of her habit of being distractible.
Yes.
But I love that you chose for her to be a stenographer because it's more making of signs, right? Like,
yes, definitely.
So I wondered if you could talk just a little bit about how you arrived at the professions of the main characters, because that's always really fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's always fun. Um, well, Shelley's, it was pretty easy because I was just, thinking of sort of symbols on paper, our more modern um, hieroglyphics, so her shorthand. Harvey's trying to write in Klingon.
Right.
Frank wanted his Captain Midnight decoder. I mean, we all had those little decoder things. So Shelley, it was kind of natural to make her a stenographer. And then Frank, well, I'm very interested myself, in ancient burial practices, and it just seemed like a good career for him to have had and to have been interested in. And he has researched and written papers on sort of old finds here and there, so that's it just fit in.
And it works with his, of course, because emotionally he's burying so many things.
He's burying a lot, and yet sort of the what he's so drawn back to finally at this house, not just to sort of see where he last saw his mother, but as a kid, he had left a lot of his favorite little things in this root cellar. Right. In that backyard. And along the way, when I was reading a lot about, the big dig in Boston and all these various digs, where, outhouses where they figured out what people were eating. And, people use their outhouses like a trash can. So you break a cup and there it goes. And so one thing that I came across that was so fascinating to me is that often when an orphanage or a school, the site of an orphanage is part of a dig, they almost always find just these little caches of toys, where children had taken their most prized possession and found a way to hide it and protect it. And that's what Frank had done. And now that's what Harvey's doing.
Right.
So that's where these two, sort of families connect, is around that kind of childhood. I won't call it hoarding. It's not hoarding. It's those little keepsakes, these things we hold on to.
And I love that root cellar is kind of the place where the one childhood from the past and the current childhood are sort of meeting each other, even though they barely overlap, in terms of the people themselves.
Yes.
But it's really the place that becomes so important. And all throughout the novel, I'm wondering, why on earth did Lil, move back with him? But I felt like it was because she knows that there's something that he's got unresolved, right?
Yes, and their daughter's down here.
Right.
So they're making that kind of migration to be near her. Oh, and in terms of career, Lil as a dancer. And part of it is, she's not really dancing so much as teaching. She's picking up what her mother left behind and what would have been a dream for her mother. But I was also thinking too of, ballet, it's story without words, so it's story through movement. So for all of them in the beginning, I was just thinking of all the different ways that we communicate And I had written an early passage years, like a dozen years ago. I was asked to teach a class, a wonderful ask in Florence. And I was completely taken with the foundling hospital there and all the little tokens that had been left, with these infants who were left behind, and you're in this building that's 600 years old, and all these lives that have these babies put on this wheel, and all these little tokens in these cases. And of course, because they're there, we know the end of that story, and yet all of these little symbols were saying the same thing. They were all saying, "I'll be back." And so through the whole novel, people are saying, "I'll be right back." Or they're saying, "I am here." Kind of the Kilroy was here, or the graffiti in the bathroom, or kids, writing their names in cement. So those were kind of my guiding fragments of language, that I'll be back and I was here.
And even Lil's narration, she's trying to sort of curate this selection of letters and notebook entries for her children, what she's going to leave for them.
Right.
And because she doesn't want them to forget, right? It's all the things that she wishes that her mother might have left for her.
Yes, because she and her dad even shortened that note, "Be right back,"
right,
to BRB, and she says, "You might have spent the rest of your life wondering, who is BRB?"
Who is BRB?
And it means be right back. And I think we all have those little codes and shorthands, language that we use with our loved ones.
And I love that. It's so intimate. It's such an intimate detail. And it also reminded me, that when I was going through my parents' things after they died, there were things that I had no idea how to decipher because they had taken the secret with them,
Yeah.
So I didn't know. I could never know what it meant. So that thing didn't have any meaning.
Right.
So it's always bringing it back around to how the person is what invests it with meaning.
Yes.
So one more thing that I was thinking about, and then maybe we should go to see if we get any questions from the listeners, is just that you mentioned that you had written this kind of before Me Too and Harvey Weinstein. Obviously, it's written before the pandemic, but there are not a lot of sort of overtly mentioned kind of current things in the novel. It feels much more close to, the people in their kind of intimate circle, and the town, which there's a lot of sort of characters that creep in who were in Life After Life. And that was part of the fun for me of reading this, is going, oh yeah, making those connections. Horace was Sadie's husband. But there are threads, and some of it is mentioned when you're talking about the teachers. I think there's a brief mention of school shooters. There are, as you were reading about with Shelley, and the lives of women and how they're affected by the things that men do. So I was just wondering about that. Is that a conscious sort of decision that you make to not name certain things in your telling?
Yeah, I think always in that first draft, I go heavy, so that I don't miss anything, so depending on what's happening in the world or life, there might be a rant or two along the way that gets cut later. I mean, certainly Shelley was sort of the mouthpiece for that. But, I made the decision because, yes, I'm in the summer of 2016. And I just made the decision not to go there. It felt like a rabbit hole to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that is a right or wrong decision. I mean, I think there may be some subtle, I mean, you sort of know where Lil stands and what she believes, and Shelley too.
Sure.
But I
There's
did.
any question of that. Yeah.
But you're right that I kept them in this very intimate, inward kind of orbit, just because I feel like much of what the news cycle has been in our lives, that it could carry you far off field,
Sure.
from the plot.
And I think it makes sense too in terms of where Lil and Shelley are in their times of life. I mean, when you're absorbed in raising a young child, there's only so much attention you have to give. And then also with Lil, you can kind of feel like everything she's doing is retrospective, right? And she's kind of trying to set up this gift of telling her stories for her children. And there's kind of that withdrawal as people get close to the end of their lives. They're withdrawing from kind of the melee of the world, right?
Yes.
And focusing on what's really important with close family,
Yes.
Memories, those kinds of things.
And Shelley's kind of hanging by a thread. I mean, you know, Shelley is just getting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, she's doing okay though.
Go
Go Shelley.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I tell you as a writer, Julia, there's my challenge. If you don't use, oh, that's breathtaking, I'm going to circle back and steal it. So I'm going to give you, what's our rule, a year, 3 years?
Is it 3 years? Okay, I'll keep that in mind. So I guess we could open up the chat in a minute if any of the listeners want to direct a chat question to me. You can go ahead and type those in, direct it to Julia Smith, where you see the little, it may say type message here, and then just above that you can type.
It looks like there's a message in there. That's just to everyone.
That's to everyone. So I'll watch the chat box, but I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about just the crossover between Life After Life and hieroglyphics, and how you're, you know, I kept thinking about Yoknapatawpha and Thomas Hardy and all the writers, Donald Harrington, writers who kind of go back to the same piece of ground, and a character who might be a minor character in one novel appears as major in the next, and vice versa.
Yeah, I love that feeling because, you know, like Ned, Harvey's camp director, who's a teacher in the school, is the son of Stanley Stone.
Oh, right. I
so
didn't make that connection.
You know, Ned had a tiny part in Life After Life. Not that he has a big part here, but he's
not bad for Ned in Life After Life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he got a little more of a chance, you know, and I could imagine circling back and checking on Shelley and Harvey.
Yeah.
Sure. No, it's often hard to leave these people. And so there's this part of me that just feels like they're just still there, sort of doing, you know,
kind of doing their life.
Yeah.
So might you circle back around to any of these folks, you think?
I would bet Shelley and Harvey.
Yeah.
I can totally see.
Well, Harvey's such a great character. It would be fun to watch him grow up.
And I don't know if you caught this, but the little girl in Life After Life, who now is older, had babysat.
Yeah.
movie. So there was
And Jason was her friend, I think.
reference to Abby. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other thing that amused me as someone who only recently has become a teacher, it was you've got some teacher talk in hieroglyphics, and then also there's that great rant by Sadie in Life After Life about, you know, all of the things that her students do. And of course, she's such a generous teacher, so warm, and so many people rely on her to bring them together. And I just wanted, because you were my teacher some time ago, I've just wondered how, you know, how your teaching has changed over the years, or how you feel you come to your students with something different maybe than you did when I was first in your classroom.
Oh my goodness. Well, hopefully I have kept up, you know, with what's going on in fiction, because people always come in excited about new work, and so it really does keep me on my toes and learning. I think though probably the root of my teaching has not varied. I mean, I think I have always been so aware of how easy it is, you know, to encourage and or to give the wrong message. I mean, I know that I'm someone, as a young writer, if I had ever experienced that kind of bloodletting workshop that I have heard about, you know, I would have tucked tail and been in the woods so fast, and you might never have seen me again. I just am not someone who would have done well with that. And I was really lucky that I had generous teachers. It doesn't mean you're an easy teacher, but you know, I think that people hear criticism if it's delivered in a way that's respectful. I mean, you can still be honest and respectful. And so, you know, I think I'm just always aware of, there's the work on the page and there's the human behind the work.
Right.
And I think that maybe at the workshop table, we're going to focus on the work on the page. But I think as a teacher, you have the responsibility to always be aware of the person on the other side. And now more than ever with, you know, Zoom, what, you know, I feel the need to, you know, to circle back and have the kind of one-on-one.
Yeah. Great. Okay, we do have a question.
Oh, good.
So here's the question. How do you think that writing about the South, your writing about the South, has changed by your own experience of living outside of the South? And that definitely is something that comes up in this novel too, right? You've got Boston folk moving to the South.
Yes, it has. You know, I definitely think it did change, because it really broadened my own landscape. I'll never forget when I first got to Boston, recognizing how much I had taken for granted about where I had grown up and what I knew, you know. And I was like going to the Whole Foods there and paying outrageous prices for magnolia leaves and pine cones for one thing, and I couldn't find pimento cheese anywhere. So that, you know, there was just so much in the language and the foliage and food that I missed. And then in a similar way, after living there for 20 years and my children growing up there, I came back, and I was, you know, happy to get back to North Carolina. I had always thought I would, but it surprised me how homesick I felt for what I had come to know. We're very adaptable creatures, and that's a good thing, I think.
It's a good thing. But I like that there are these characters in this novel too that have this both the outsider and an insider perspective.
Yes, Yes, and I think, you know, Lil is someone who's never lived in the South, so she's kind of like, oh my, there are all these people invading my space and hugging me. I mean, that would not be happening now.
No, no.
But but you know, I mean, it is a different way of interacting, because I remember, you know, being in the grocery store in Boston and just making eye contact and just talking to whoever looked at me, and I think people thought I was just, you know, from Mars.
Yeah, the same thing happened to me when I lived in New York. I tried to make eye contact with everybody on the streets of Manhattan. It doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah. They tell you not to do that,
Yes.
in fact. But I was doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Hey, hey, how you doing?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think we're getting to the end of our time. I don't see any more questions popping up. Are you continuing your tour?
Yes, I'm doing gallery so I can see who's here with us. Oh, look at all of you. Thank you for coming. Yes, I have it's a whole virtual tour, so it's just a new world.
Do you like doing the virtual tour, or is it just
Well, it is what we have. I mean, I do miss seeing people in person, and you know,
the travel's easier?
the travel is much easier, you know. That part is true. So I'm thrilled we're able to do something, you know.
Me too. I'm really happy about that. So it's been great talking with you. I have a few notes that Greensboro Bound would like me to share with the audience. We have 2 more events coming up in August. On Friday, August the 14th at 7 o'clock, we have food journalist and author Kathleen Purvis chatting with Daniel Pierce about his latest book, which is called Tar Heel Lightning: How Secret Stills and Fast Cars Made North Carolina the Moonshine Capital of the World. So that might be pertinent, given that I was just reading how our liquor consumption is you know, top notch in North Carolina right now during the pandemic.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. So there's another problem brewing, so to speak. And then Thursday, August the 20th at 4:30, a conversation between author Tessie Castillo and special guest John Powell, director of the Center for Restorative Justice at Campbell University, and Tessie's death row co-author Michael Aline Braxton. So all of the previous events for Greensboro Bound and this conversation can be found on the Greensboro Bound website in the virtual events library. So I encourage you to go on and look at greensborobound.com. If you've enjoyed the program, of course, we have to do a shout out for considering a donation for Greensboro Bound. These gifts help us present all of the programming free to the community, so you can give online at greensborobound.com. And I'm excited that Greensboro Bound has been able to bring a lot of the events that we would have had at our festival in May to your Zoom screen throughout the year. So keep looking for the events. Jill, you're getting all kinds of thank you and enjoyed it and wonderful and all of that. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Listen, Julia, thank you. It's wonderful to see you, and I'll look forward to when I can see you in person.
Me too. That'll be great. And everybody go buy Hieroglyphics, this excellent novel. Read the one before it, Life After Life. Of course, we prefer you to order from Scuppernong Books. Barring that, choose another independent. So.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone. This has been a lot of fun.
It's been great. Thank you, Jill.
Bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.